Real-time 3D graphics were part of arcade gaming since the early days, providing a means to impress audiences and realize distinct game concepts. Atari was one of the major forces to bring this technology to the arcades. Later, in the 80s, Namco also jumped in and released their 3D racer Winning Run. However, these expensive and complex projects were still sparse in this era of pixel art. Sega was still highly successful at the time with their sprite scaling games, which simulate a true 3D feel within a 2D graphic system. But the growing potential of real-time 3D graphics was not lost on them. To keep participating in the tech race with companies like Namco, Sega made some serious investments in the development of a real-time 3D graphics board. They set up a big recruitment drive to attract talent with knowledge in the area of 3D. But whether polygons would surpass traditional pixel art or remain merely a showpiece was still up for debate at that time. Sega's development divisions were structured around traditional sprite-based games, but one man in the company who had a great interest in 3D was Yu Suzuki, Sega's most prolific arcade developer, responsible for their biggest hits and in charge of the new division AM2. It was only fitting that he would lead the development of a launch title for their 3D board. In 1991, Suzuki gathered a small team composed of many new recruits to start working on their debut game, Virtua Racing. Sega already had their fair share of experience with developing arcade racers, a genre that lended itself perfectly to the transition to full 3D from a gameplay perspective. Suzuki worked closely with the CG board team while coding the core engine in assembly language. He was actually one among few to have deep knowledge in this field, being interested in programming 3D since his days at university. The CG board included an array of Fujitsu DSP chips that would be put to use for the geometry calculations. This was still in the days when they couldn't count on code libraries. Fundamental functions like clipping had to be implemented manually in separate chips. While the CG board was in development, the Virtua team emulated its estimated performance on a Silicon Graphics Iris system, using it as their core development environment to run and test their game code. Silicon Graphics systems were all optimized for 3D rendering and therefore also became the system of choice for developers of high-end 3D modeling software. Out of the three leading high-end packages, Sega ultimately chose Softimage Creative Environment, praised for its relatively easy learning curve. The profession of 3D imagery was still a niche within gaming. This provided a great opportunity for up-and-coming artists to quickly move through the ranks. The 3D artists working on Virtua Racing were able to realize distinct set pieces for each of the tracks within the very limited polygon budget. In true Suzuki tradition, the realism would be paired with a touch of arcade fun. It gave them the freedom to include landmarks like bridges and add seagulls at the start for a fun touch. For the backgrounds, the team relied on the more traditional bitmap processors of the arcade board. As a separate entity from the 3D graphics, the background position had to be matched with coding as accurately as possible, just relying on 2D coordinates. Although the polygons and pixel graphics were two different art styles, they managed to nicely complement each other, lifting the quality of the visuals. Virtua Racing made its rounds in the trade show scene in 1992. The dynamic camera angles backed by the high-quality arcade gameplay expected from a Sega title certainly impressed the media. The game got an abundance of coverage in the gaming press and became an icon among arcade racers. Virtua Racing arrived in a new era of arcade gaming in which versus fighters were quickly becoming a dominant genre. It was also the era when CGI hit the mainstream in the entertainment industry, and virtual reality became the new hype. Within the 3 years that it took for Sega to develop their board, the gaming landscape was already starting to transition to 3D. The know-how they had gathered from Virtua Racing positioned them among the top in real-time 3D game developers. Suzuki's AM2 would now fully dedicate their efforts to 3D, having multiple game plans in development simultaneously. Among them was a martial arts game that would pose them a fair share of challenges. One of the first roadblocks to overcome was in the area of animation. Virtua Racing centered on rigid body models like cars, objects that were relatively easy to animate, but the game also featured several supporting human characters. Repositioning each body part by hand had proven to be a tedious process and resulted in stiff animations. The level of character animation required for their fighter would demand that the team make massive advancements. One of the designers on Virtua Racing, Seiichi Ishii, had some experience in character animation. He'd once traced the movements of the movie Drunken Master as research on character motion, a skill set that would earn him the role of lead designer. Together with a small team, he worked on a demo for several months to prove they were able to realize a polygonal fighting game. Softimage and SGI machines were starting to become pivotal in the development of these 3D games. Sega made a huge investment in 1992, providing the whole AM2 production crew with the 3D software and an Indigo workstation. They could start to utilize some of the new animation features from the latest Softimage release. Inverse kinematics, for instance, made it possible to reposition body parts and retain their connection downstream, a welcome feature for Ishii in his process of animating a moveset. Although Softimage helped to make the work less tedious, it still required the necessary skill in character animation to make convincing attacks. After a process of trial and error, Ishii began to fully think through the motions. Instead of just focusing on the arms and legs, he would recreate how the whole body would move when delivering a kick, resulting in attacks with a sense of weight and power. Using reference material also remained key in the animation process. The victory poses specifically were all based on filmed footage of the team members. Another main focal point of development was to explore how to best represent humans with a low number of polygons. The designs quickly evolved from simple matchstick figures to more detailed fighters made from 600 polygons. These first achievements in character design and animation were two major milestones. Other experiments were done with real-time dynamics, moving objects through programmed algorithms instead of keyframe animations. Algorithms ended up controlling various animations in the game and added a sense of weight and realism. Thanks to these successful first steps, their demo project advanced into full production on a game that became known as Virtua Fighter. As Suzuki's stature within Sega grew, his daily schedule became packed with managing duties. He was therefore less hands-on with the main programming, but still retained his involvement as director, playing a pivotal role in tackling the project's next big obstacle, the gameplay. Martial arts wasn't a topic of expertise for Suzuki. In addition, there were practically no examples of how to translate the fighting genre to 3 dimensions. A crucial first decision to make was how to best utilize the 3D space. They chose to keep the fighters locked on each other at all times, thus simplifying the complexity of how to line up attacks against the opponent. The 3D aspect of the game would still play a major role. With the dynamic moving camera, the fighters moved across the arena in 3 dimensions. The camera system also allowed them to keep their distance. This was a strategic element for the player to take advantage of, especially with the time limit of 30 seconds per round. The strict time limit was implemented out of necessity to increase the coin flow and thus make it more manageable for arcade owners to see a return on their high investment. Another strategic element was to push the adversary out of the bounded area. Players had to keep track of their surroundings. One wrong move at the edge could suddenly turn the battle around. Virtua Fighter already had its fair share of game elements that made it unique within the genre, but one of its revolutionary features was yet to be defined: its control scheme. The team experimented with various radically different concepts. One even relied on an array of buttons to simulate a touchpad, but their final setup would turn out to be the complete opposite. 2 buttons for attacks and a button to guard. Attacks were mapped to simple joystick and button combinations. This control scheme made it very accessible to new players. By instinctively moving the controller, they could pull off a variety of moves and combos. It was the result of analyzing play patterns of people outside of their core demographic that set them in this new direction. And it wouldn't take much away from the attraction for skilled players. knowing the intricacies of the character's moves was still key to becoming a true master. The core gameplay and animations were becoming well defined as 1993 progressed, but shaping the fighters would ultimately be a long process of revisions, requiring them to completely remodel characters from scratch numerous times. With each iteration, they were becoming more skilled in giving them a human appearance. The animation data and character models were stored separately in these 3D projects, contrary to pixel-based games, so they were able to keep refining the models without losing the animation data. To further raise the polygon budget of the models, the crucial decision was made to simplify the backgrounds. The landscapes that were initially built from polygons were now entirely done with bitmaps. The total budget of 6,000 polygons per frame could now be distributed between the two fighters and the battle arena. With the additional polygons, they were able to further increase the level of detail of their characters. A great benefit of a full 3D setting was the freedom to change how the fighters were lit in each stage. The light source could be positioned at a low angle to simulate a sunset with matching long shadows. The most innovative use of light was in Sarah's stage, set on a skyscraper rooftop with light-up floor panels. The light source would therefore come from below to create a distinct mood. A crucial element that added a sense of familiarity to this groundbreaking experience would be the game's soundtrack. Composer Takayuki Nakamura was assigned early in development and was involved in all audio-related aspects, from the music and sound effects to the arcade hardware. Nakamura had a collection of instruments and audio equipment set up in his workspace. With his Korg M1 and Fender guitar, he was able to add the energetic early 90s arcade sound to the game. Recording and editing samples was an essential part of the workflow in this era. Nakamura used the popular sample from Akai, the S1000, in addition to packages like Sound Designer and Sample Cell for the Mac. The sound effects for the various moves were based on a variety of stock samples, from opening a bottle of cider to a jet fighter. The voices of the fighters, on the other hand, were specifically recorded for the game. The audio in all its aspects added both energy and a human touch to this CGI experience. The game was beginning to resemble the final release in many ways, but there were still certain features that needed to be fleshed out. What the project team needed the most was the unfiltered impression of an arcade audience. Virtua Fighter underwent its first location test and trade show debut in the summer of 1993. One peculiar feature of this arcade build was a barcode scanner. Each player scanned product barcodes to affect the fight. It was a system designed to tap from the local barcode battler hype, and so appeal to a young audience. Other game features were a tournament mode and a number of non-playable boss characters that players would encounter. The location test provided the team with valuable feedback. The core gameplay was well received, but the overall consensus was to remove the additional distracting elements like the barcode scanner. Location tests were also important to judge the popularity of characters. The character Shiba proved to be unpopular and still lacked signature moves. Likewise, the team felt the boss characters were also lacking in this category. They would all be removed from the final build, and instead the players fought a bonus round at the end against Duro, a cutting-edge android that was actually derived from an experiment to test the polygon limit of their system. To fill the final slot in the main cast, a number of new characters were proposed in this final hour. Out of the various proposals, Akira was chosen, and even became the lead character of the game. Virtua Fighter officially debuted in the arcades the following December. While the real-time 3D was the attraction, it was the dynamic, deep, well-thought-out new gameplay that made players stay, offering the player a completely new type of fighter grounded in realism. With Virtua Fighter, Sega had their first hit in the booming versus fighter genre. The host of game design decisions in combination with the 3D gameplay set it in a league of its own. Virtua Fighter became a major milestone for the industry and proved to be a template for this new subgenre in versus fighters. The Virtua Fighter DNA would even cross over to new franchises, as the lead designer Seiichi Ishii left to work for Namco and develop Tekken. During Virtua Fighter's development, the Sega hardware team had been working on an even more powerful board. They had formed a partnership with General Electric, a company with high-end simulation hardware for the military market in their portfolio. At the end of the Cold War, the company saw the need to start shopping their high-tech systems to markets like entertainment. GE Aerospace and Evans & Sutherland were selling their sophisticated real-time texture mapping technology to the arcade developers. While Namco chose Evans & Sutherland, Sega made a deal with General Electric, reaching an agreement in August 1992. The Model 2 board was completed a year after their alliance, requiring the necessary work to make the texture mapping hardware fit the budget of an arcade game. Daytona USA became the debut title of the new board early in 1994, further cementing Sega's AM2 division as a recognizable and well-respected brand name. These were the days when there was still money to be made in the arcades. It gave the developers a budget to use hardware years ahead of the home consoles and develop groundbreaking game experiences, pushing the whole gaming industry forward. As Model 2 neared completion, work on the second installment of Virtua Fighter began. For the first game, the team had drawn from martial arts comics and movies. Suzuki was adamant to heighten the realism in the sequel. He went on a 12-day research trip to China, visiting various important sites and experiencing martial arts masters in action himself. Suzuki shot numerous photos during his research trip. Some would be used for textures, others served as important reference. For instance, one of the stages would be modeled after Longmen Grotto's river. It would turn out to be a showpiece with its dynamic use of light. While the Model 2 board had greater processing power, the total polygon budget remained tight. The team prioritized running the game at 60 FPS, producing fluent, lifelike motions, but at the cost of the maximum polygon count. Textures were key in providing the game with a far more sophisticated look than its predecessor. The designers incorporated shading into these flat textures, which, when wrapped around the low polygonal model, made for a detailed look. The AM2 team also continued to take full advantage of newly added Softimage features, like the support for motion capture. They would use the Flock of Birds motion capture solution to capture roughly 1,000 moves. The captured data was tweaked afterward to fit the gameplay. Only a selection of the capture data ended up in the final game, but these specific moves made for a huge improvement and added a liveliness to these computer characters. Virtua Fighter 2 hit the arcades hardly a year after its predecessor, but was nevertheless a monumental step forward. The cutting-edge visuals were accompanied by more refined game mechanics, building upon the strong foundation of the first game. Each of the returning characters had additional moves, and so simulated that they'd gone into training to return stronger in this new tournament. Virtua Fighter quickly became one of Sega's flagship franchises, particularly in Japan, where numerous tournaments were held. One would even challenge the most skilled players to win from 100 competitors in a row. Meanwhile, the characters enjoyed popularity both inside and outside the arcades. Virtua Fighter had been, from the start, a benchmark for polygonal human characters in video games. The computer-generated characters even became the center point of an art exhibition in 1995. Visitors to Tokyo's Oji Paper Gallery were presented with the art of Arii Nobutaka. His work was described by the press as digital photography design. He followed up the exhibition with an art book named Model 2. Nobutaka was one among a group of designers working inside Sega's publishing department, creating images for game covers and promotional use. Their work also made it to a series of standalone Saturn discs, each centered around one of the fighters. These came out in the era when development of the third entry began and acted as a benchmark for the level of detail. Virtua Fighter 3 would further push the boundaries thanks to a new arcade board, a true powerhouse in 3D graphics with the ability to calculate real-time cloth dynamics. With the extended polygon count, the fights would take place in immersive full 3D environments, featuring uneven terrain and fog effects. Thanks to the top-class hardware and the more refined gameplay, Virtua Fighter 3 widened the gap with the competition. It had been unprecedented, the giant leaps AM2 had made since their work on Virtua Racing. They were at the heart of the CGI revolution, showcasing the most powerful hardware in gaming and advanced production techniques, applying advanced texture mapping technology and motion capture, but also creating a new subgenre of fighters in the process. It's indisputable that Virtua Fighter was a true milestone for the industry.